welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a cute jumping spider. Like always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here's the jumping spider. I'm scared of spiders, so I tried to find the cutest spider, think of the cutest spider I could sort of find and draw that one, and I think this one's pretty cute. The little jumping spiders with like the flat faces seem cuter than some of the others. So they've got a couple of different colors. I think it depends on the type of jumping spider. They've got some grayish fur all over them. So we will be drawing it out like fur, except they're little pincer things in their mouth. They have some black, so we'll have to, and there's enough black that I'm going to have to use gray for black, but it's not a ton. It's like on his little feet, and then little black strip on its head. Also has some orange. So yeah, we're gonna get started with some of this orange fur. So as we build it up, I always do, one stroke and a stroke in between to build up the look of fur. That is very much what they have. Now they have, kind of in the middle here, they have a section where their hair kind of runs together, like some hair's going this way, some hair's going that way. I see the same thing on owls. As owls, and their feathers come down, they sort of run together at this point. So jumping spiders seem to be the same way. Now to avoid, sorry for the plane. To avoid line conflicts, I'm gonna have the hair follow up, like pull it up and then have it looping up in between his eyes. So that's important, trying to avoid line conflicts. Sort of running it together there. And then being careful around the eyes. We can pick up, differences with the eyes if we get something a little wrong. So always kind of being careful around those. Making sure that, the hair isn't going too much. In a lot of cases, it doesn't matter with hair or fur that we're going outside of the lines, but the eyes are one of the places that we need to be a little bit more careful. And I've, never drawn a spider before, so some of this is new to me as to how I think the hair would go. I know it loops into this corner, but trying to make sure it makes the most sense to what I'm doing. It probably comes off the edge. Just like the other one, right? I'm going to loop this down and in between. Yeah, there we go. And then just bring it down and off the edge. They're pretty hairy, so this edge is kind of like a guideline. It's roughly where the figure is, but it's certainly not where that hair is going to stay confined to. And then we'll do the same thing right on this side. Bring the hair up, follow the eye carefully. Oh, that's not carefully. Having the hair come down in between. Right, and all this, I don't even know if it's fur or hair. Kind of coming from over here. So looping it all in that way. Alright. So far so good, and then we'll have, there's a little bit of hair coming up here. Same thing, I'm putting other strokes in between. I'm varying the hair, right? Like I'm not keeping it all straight. Giving it some variation. A bit, because they're so hairy, their hair is going to be going in kind of multiple directions. Now there's a little bit of orange right up on the top here of the leg. So it has the legs, right? You have a section coming down in the middle, and then you're going to have hair coming off. But a lot of hair coming off. So their legs are very hairy. And then the same thing on this side, right? You're going to have a section kind of in the middle, but a lot of hair kind of coming off of that. Now we're going to start with this whitish grayish color. There's some of that in his face. A few like strands of this that come through and off. Whatever you do on one side, do on the other. Right, so. And then, continuing this hairy leg down. Just gonna pull the middle section down first, and then really fan out that edge. I also realized in the sketch, something I'm going to have to do is this leg is as long as this leg, so I'm going to have to tuck this one up a little bit. I'll be making kind of that judgment call as I do it. That's an easy enough change to make. Kind of following this down, and then having the hair coming off. Gonna do their little front legs. Partly because they're in front, right? So I want to understand exactly where the hair delineation is happening and where it's happening. Alright, so all of this is coming off. There's some hair that's going to be behind the leg where it's pulling forward that we can't see because of the angle. So it's not all just coming off of what we can see, right? Like there's a part behind this that comes up. So there's going to be some hair that we'll be able to see behind that that's going in different angles, potentially. All right. But always, one stroke in between another. That's how you build up fur. But otherwise, if I'm having it come off of this, right, I'm having this fur come down and out. Except at the top. And I'm likely not going to put like a strand in between out from the connection point. If this is all coming from this little guy, then it's got to extend all the way from there. Now I can do it at the edge, but not in the middle of the actual hair itself. Unless it's coming from behind, which, again, yeah, we would be able to see some of it from behind. All right. He's coming along pretty good. All right. Now same with this one. Of course we have hair coming down like that. And really, this hair would be in front of that one, so let's go ahead and pull this down. Give me a better idea of exactly what we're working with. And now we can pull this off. This long hair. Highlights and shadows will really help delineate, how this is going to be looking. Alright, so we're gonna have this leg cut right through here. Have this come up. So not only did I narrow it, but I, have it coming up a little higher. And then, popping that hair out. So this would be hidden by this leg, but it is the, the knee for this one. Same thing with this side. You have, some of this is hidden by the other leg, by the hair on the other leg, but it is the knee for this guy. Nice long strokes, which makes it go a little quicker. And then we have these knees behind, these last little guys here that you can't see a lot of, but if we can make the detail pop, it'll potentially turn out really well. Okay. There's also, actually before I get rid of that, well, let me move it here. There's a little bit of hair through here. It's not a lot. Seems very faded, but it is in there. Okay. Now they have some, they have multiple colors on their little, I guess they're pincers. Almost like a shimmery kind of color in here, and it's kind of textured and bumpy. So, we're going to make these like bumpy textured. So to do texture, right, I go up and down and up and down and up and down, and it creates the illusion of texture. And we're going to build this out and then add in, there's a couple different colors. But we'll build it out and then add in the other color as well, which is like a pink and a yellow. And bring this, all the way down. We'd be able to see it through some of the hair. I'm going to bring it all the way up. Some of this will change with highlights and shadows. Right, but just, shifting and moving and bringing it down. I'm also going to change the layer order, right? So I'm drawing the pink on top of the white, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to drag it down to be under the white. Because some of this hair will block it. And just, texture down. We'll see if I think this works nicely. I think it will. Same thing with the other pincer. Backing it off a little before I get to the top, right? Like even on this one, we backed it off a bit. Bringing that texture down. In a way that makes sense, right? So here's the line. So I wouldn't, I brought it over a little too far. But just that up and down kind of effect. Works great for texture, works great for bird skin. Anytime you're really trying to really add a ton of texture, this can be an effective way to do it. All right. So now we're going to add a little bit of yellow in there too. Which is more sporadic, so I'm just kind of randomly pulling it in. And it's also on the edges more. So in the gaps and on the edges. Same thing on this one. Now for the black, which we're gonna have to do, black is gray. And I'm actually gonna come down here and mark it. Okay, so there's not a lot of black. Some of this hair is though, so we'll pull this, you know, up. Same thing though, I'm also making sure, you know, I'm going in between the orange lines I've already done, right? Like that rule still applies even though this is a different color. Still layering up the fur the same way. Or the hair. I just don't know what the spiders technically have. And then it's got some long black hair. Makes it kind of look like it has a crazy hairdo. That's nice and easy, just, you know, light, long strokes. It'll probably stay that way even once we get the shadows and the highlights. And then the feet tips, which I don't think have hair on them. So this would just be, I guess, skin. Now with this leg, right, like we pulled that back, so I'm being mindful of where I think that edge would be now. Just making sure it's kind of rounded. So, you know, not a ton of black, which is good. It can be hard to do black. Sorry, I'm pulling that back. I made a stroke that was way too long, and I thought I could cover it, but I don't think I could. Without extending the foot down further than it already is. He's kind of stepping forward a bit, so this one is a little more in front of the other, but if it's too much, it might look out of place. See, this one I can probably cover. Sometimes you extend it past and it's fine, and sometimes it's a little out of place. Now, even their pincers have some black on them as it comes back into, you know, their heads, so I'm just going to do this as well. All right. So, we're going to get started with the arms. It's probably the easiest to get my feet under me for adding highlights to a spider. We're going to have the light source coming from over here. As always, that means it's above and in front of, not behind or next to. And it's going to be full pin pressure. So right, full pin pressure as we come up. So it's really going to give her, I think this, well, I don't know. Potentially her spider eyes are a bit flat. Their faces are a bit flat here, so other animals would have bulges where their eyes are. I don't know that it's big enough to really be noticeable, so we're going to do full pin pressure even by the eyes. Typically, because of the way our eyes bulge, as you come under the eye, there's that little bit of shadowing. There probably is just a smidge, but it's not going to be a lot. I don't know how noticeable it would be. Right, just following the lines we've already drawn. With that full pin pressure. This is where, you know, if there's line conflicts, it might show up because we're going to have trouble reconciling different things. So this, especially on a shadowed side, it's going to be a lot harder to hide a line conflict. That's why it's so important to make sure there aren't any when I keep talking about it. If there's a line conflict, this is where it'll be noticeable, is when you're adding shadows and highlights. Alright, so bringing all of this down. All edges are in shadow, so I'm backing off my pin pressure just a little bit as we come to this edge. But this orange is going to be hidden somewhat by the white. And then still just pulling it down, following his contour, whatever it is. I think it might be a her. I feel like a lot of spiders are female because the males get eaten. That might be an incorrect assessment on my part. Right, backing off my pin pressure because it's coming down and underneath. But it's going to go right back into this highlight. You'll see me often pop like a layer like this off. It's because I'm trying to get a feel for how it looks, and the drawing layer can make it difficult to see if I've messed something up. Like this eye, it's not even. Which I couldn't see through the drawing layer. I'm just trying to figure out if it's because I didn't bring this up enough, or if I brought one line up too high. And I think it's because I didn't bring it up enough, so we'll even that up. Again, being careful around the eyes. That's why I, made a point of fixing that. Even with spiders, we'll notice if something's wrong. Making sure it's nice and rounded. And that full pin pressure. Making sure that this fades in. Again, there is going to be some white still here. Some white hair. That'll be covering some of this, which is, can be good in the event you make a mistake. You can hide it with some extra hair. But it also means it will actually brighten it just a little bit, but that's fine. It's going to be in a highlighted section, so that's not anything that's too crazy. But making sure it still fades in nicely as much as possible. Here, like owls, it seems like there's line conflicts because of how the hair comes off and into itself over the middle. The owls have a nice beak. The spiders don't. And the spiders, it's like it just runs into each other. You have different sides just colliding. And then again underneath, right, like all edges are in shadow. I may come back in and mess up the hair because it's almost too perfect, right? Like the hair isn't delineating necessarily the edge of its body, and I need to make sure that's clear. Okay, so pulling that back into highlight and then running them together over here. Just making sure that the eyes are nice and seamless. So this side I did a circle all the way around. This one, what I did was I had it, when I sketched it, and I guess I should have realized I'd done it, is I have the lines coming off as you're doing it. This creates less line conflicts on the left eye. The way that it like comes up and off and up and off and up and off and up and off. Sort of circling the whole eye. That creates less line conflicts than what I did over here where I circled it and then had the lines coming off. It'll be more important on this side as we go. We're going to be slowly transitioning into shadows soon. Their faces are so flat, they're going to have a lot of highlight on them. So the highlight will go further than it would on some other animals. Still just pulling it down. Already starting to think about that, transition though, because we're getting close to where this would transition over. So I'm going to go ahead and just do some light pin pressure over here. Get it kind of ready. And maybe bridge the rest of this with the light pin pressure. Because it would be transitioning at some point here. probably on this side of the eye, there's probably a little bit that it's still catching some highlight, but it's probably turning at this point along that backside, so I would say, yeah, this is probably a good spot to cut it off. With highlight will likely come all the way over here. And by likely, I mean I'm going to draw it that way, so that's how it's going to be. But right, like there's highlight probably up into here. That's transitioning into shadow through here, which means it'll be transitioning into shadow kind of in the same spot down here. I'm going to go ahead and shadow the rest of this, and then that'll give me flexibility to feather it in, right? I know I talk about it almost every video, but you don't want a jarring transition from highlight to shadow. You want it to look nice and sort of tapered in and feathered in, and so it's easier to do that by putting that highlight or that shadow in and then building the highlight on top of it than trying to put the highlight and erase away, at least in this style. So this is very light pen pressure, really holding back. If there's an errant one that's a little too bright, that's fine. An errant stroke, sometimes that happens. Especially if you're drawing in a position that's a little weaker, inevitably, sometimes you get a stronger line. You just don't want several in a row in the same spot, because then it will look like that's a highlight. And with this, what's going to happen is once we start feathering this in, which will be in just a second, I'm not going to be putting full pin pressure, right? So to feather this in, I'm actually just going to be adding more lines. So this is still not full pin pressure, but you can see just by adding more lines, it's feathering that in. And we'll do the same thing down here. Again, not full pin pressure, just more lines to create a transition from highlight to shadow. I want to make sure it's coming all the way down. I mean, not all the way, like, you know, you have some shadowing down here, but you want to make sure I'm not looping it in a spot, especially because his face probably still bulging here, so this is also still probably a little bit of highlight. And then fading it here. And then just making sure that feathers in a little nicer. So putting a little bit more pin pressure, but still not full, right through here. There we go. Now, the head up here, it's close enough to the edge. It's probably in shadow. Might be a little strip of highlight right against the black, but I would think it would be in shadow. So I'm just lightly filling it in. Again, light pin pressure. And especially this, as opposed to a completely shadowed side, if there is a little variation where a highlight kicks in, or it looks like a highlight kicks in, it's probably fine. Unless it looks out of place at the end, you know, it's close enough, it'd be fine. All right, we're coming right along. Now we're going to do his knee. So you have a rounding figure here. So this is on the shadowed side. Light pin pressure. And making sure they're individual strokes and hairs that are going in different directions. And then of course you have some hair coming off and hair in between, right? So we're going to build all of that up. And then you're going to have some highlight. I'm actually going to do the whole thing in shadow just to get my bearings for where exactly the middle of the leg is. Okay, so it's probably right through here. So this is highlight. And then we'll feather that into shadow. there's going to be some highlighting. I'm going to pull some of that off the edge, not all the way to the tips of the hair, but you know, enough, because some of the strands likely would be in highlight. Same is true here. Leg is forward, so the body is probably not blocking this. But just like the other one, I'm going to do the whole thing in shadow first. Just to get my bearings. His knee almost looks like it's got like a little hairdo going on, which I guess it technically does. Alright, so middle, probably roughly around here. Some highlight kicking in, and then going into shadow. And some of these hair coming up, having some highlights to them. Even some on the other side. But not a lot. Okay. Just debating on which thing to do next. I actually think I'm going to do the pincers next, because the hair is going to be over them. So we'll get that really bright pink. Almost looks like neon reflection. Right, I almost started to do it when I started doing this, but you know, you're going to have same idea, following that contour of what I've already drawn. All edges in shadow, so, but otherwise full pin pressure on that up and down, those up and down strokes. Edge in shadow. Same down here, I'm going to pull that down. Just make sure that's in shadow. Backside, of course, would be in shadow. So that transitions over. And then, you know, it's obviously in shadow where it's going under his mouth here. Now I'm doing this in shadow because there's going to be, again, a transition point on these little pincer guys because they're rounded. Creating the shadow so I can feather it in. I can feather the highlight in smoothly. Okay. That's one. And we're going to have this one, right? All edges in shadow. So I'm making sure that's nice shadow over here. Top obviously in shadow, and I'm leaving a gap in some places. And then of course the back side is, so I'm going to do the whole thing in shadow again, and then feather it in. Still keeping that texture, that up and down texture. Now for those highlights. Leaving some shadowed gaps as well. I did a little bit on the other one as too. Because of how their little pincers look, like it's got some bulges of flesh here or there that don't connect. Could be wrong. Alright, feathering this out. Okay. And now we'll get that yellow in. Same thing though, right? All edges are in shadow. And then I'll pick up on that highlight. But feathering it in. And then a shadow on the back side. So we're just holding back that pin pressure. Edge and shadow, and then going into highlight. A little burst down here. And then shadow on the back side. Now, I have some highlight coming this far over, so I'm just going to feather this in a little. Not a lot, because it is transitioning into shadow through here, but just making sure it stays consistent. Okay. Her things look really bright. I might have to mute these colors a bit. And I think I'm going to come back in and readjust. There's a odd looking shadow right under here, so I'm just going to fix that. Yeah. Let me feather it a bit more. Yeah, I think that works. Okay. Now for this like light gray hair. So this isn't the black yet. That whitish, grayish hair. So some of it's coming off here. We're going to make sure this is coming off and noticeable, but still gapping it. You know, enough kind of in between. It's a little too much. Over eager with my stroke. Now backside, so this is more shadowed. Hair coming up certainly, but more shadowed. Now the legs. Maybe I should do these guys first. Light source coming from above and to the right, so the tips would be in shadow. Backside is potentially in shadow, but remember, right, we'll add some bursts of light to some of this hair. Backside of the leg in shadow. So bringing this down and then pulling that hair out. Making sure that's nice and clear that the hair is in fact blocking the little pincer thing. Alright, and this is highlight. Okay, I'm going to switch to doing this hair in shadow real fast, but some of this will be in highlight because they're long strands, so some of that would catch it, but you know, all edges are in shadow, so trying to make sure that it's still shadowed in some spots on the edge, even if I add highlight to it in a second. Right, not pulling that highlight all the way to the edge. But definitely some strands can come out and be highlighted. Now the same is true again on this side. Some of them probably would be. Still would have a dip though in the leg. And I often pull back like that because that gives me a better view of the whole picture. Sometimes when you're close, it's harder to see if there's something that's not right. And if you pull back, you can kind of get a feel for what that is, or if you've done something that looks a little off. Same thing on this side. Get his little leg sort of situated. Alright, and just sort of lightly, you know, pulling this hair on down. Got nice, long, fluffy hair. I'm gonna actually extend the hair on this guy as well. That's the fact that it's so long on the other one. And I think that's how I had drawn it anyway. Even though there's another leg back there that's doing some of it, that's fun. Alright, so now just like the other one, we're going to add the highlights, which is going to be on this side. The hair coming off. And then fading it off as we pull it over. But like the other one, still making sure that even though we have a shadowed side and a highlighted side, that there's still some highlight into these hairs down here. Probably would be. Longer the hair comes off of an object, less likely it's blocked by said object, and therefore will potentially be catching some light. Especially considering the angle of the light source. Alright, so we have his... He actually looks really cute. Nice little fluffy spider. Alright. So now we have his legs. Doing this in shadow because it likely would be. You have a leg coming back and connecting with the body, so you have a leg that's actually blocking it on this side. Few hairs will probably have some highlight to them, but because of how tucked back it is, right, it's behind this arm, it's behind the front part of the leg, it's, you know, it's behind, potentially behind the body a little bit, so it likely isn't going to have a whole lot of highlight at all. But the front one will. The front part of the same leg will. Again, a few errant hairs that probably have some highlight. But otherwise, that'll be in shadow. That's actually probably too much. And then this front part of the leg, you know, just like the hands, I'm going to shadow it and then add the highlights. So again, it's just this light pin pressure. Even though I know some of this will be in highlight. It's just going to be easier. It's such a small space. Sometimes, especially when you're dealing with a small space, I find it easier to shadow the whole thing and then add the highlights from there. Alright, now to add the highlights. Making sure I'm also still matching what I did in the orange, right? So this is where I determined highlights would be. So we'll pull that down. Now some of this down here in shadow, right, because it's the bottom. So fading that off down here. And then making sure it's faded into shadow on this side. And just like before, you know, adding those highlights on just some of the long hair on the back side. Like they're catching light because of the angle. But still making sure this is distinctly shadowed. Maybe a little less dramatically. Just going to lighten up the shadow basically, a little bit. And we have this fluffy leg. Can't see much of. And see, I'm adding those highlights in between the shadowed sections on this previous one. That'll help delineate what's what. Again, that tip going into shadow. And then the back side coming into shadow over here. Now, you know, I can change how deep this shadow is by adding some more highlight, but still enough that it leaves a delineation between the two legs, right? So if I pull back, I can still see very clearly where one leg ends and one leg starts. Because there's just enough shadow on this edge that it helps delineate that. There is the top of one you can see back here. I don't know that it's worth trying to fill it in now. Maybe, since it's right up there, I'm going to just fill in some. Just a little, because then it's going to sink. Give it just a little bit of highlight on that side. Get through the... Yeah. You kind of get the impression there's a leg back there. And now for this side. Be doing the same thing, starting it all off in shadow, and then adding and sort of feathering in those highlights. Now on this one, the leg is coming into the body, so there is some shadowing, but there also is probably some highlighting up here on this back side. Probably a little bit of highlighting here. But it's going to fade off. And then we have the front part of the leg. Alrighty, now we have that side that's going to be in highlight. Tip down here, you know, going back into shadow, and then fading out the highlight to shadow. With some errant strands backside with some highlight to them. And then this guy back here. Now, he probably is far back enough that it likely won't have any real big highlights at all. Maybe a few strands I might add it in. But otherwise, on this side, not really. Add a few errant strands. Kind of already has a few too. Yeah. Kind of adds to the believability when you have a few that do have it, but otherwise we'll leave that in shadow. And then we have, you know, this back leg here too, who will be in shadow. Some of it might be in highlight. I mean, it's going to be blocked by a lot. Probably a few errant strands at the top. So maybe a little bit here. But not a lot. Just a few strands. I didn't do many swipes. That's going to be just enough to sort of catch that light. Alright, now I am going to add a little bit more texture here. Not a lot, because there's not a lot in here as far as that fur goes. But I'm going to do just a little bit. And then I'm going to do that with the darker for the black, which is just that dark gray. When you're doing, you know, using a dark gray for black, I have to hold off the pin pressure completely on all of it, really. Not a good way to do it, and mindful of how many strokes I'm putting, right? So I'm being very careful on how many strokes are going in here. Some of what's going to make this look black are the brighter colors around it. So despite adding more highlight to this, it'll still have that dark appearance. And a little bit more. So we add a little bit highlight here. Not much, still very light pin pressure. I'm just adding more lines. And we'll transfer that over as we come over, or we'll taper that off as we come over, right? Because we still want to try and create shadows and highlights. Not as easy to do with black. And then tapering it off. Yeah, see, that kind of still looks black. What I may have to do, though, is take off, I'm just looking for it. Yeah, I might have to take that off, because his little hair looks gray up in here. Okay, well, first we're going to do the feet, and then we'll analyze. Again, light, pin pressure, mindful of every stroke. So the bigger expansive black you have, the harder this is. So these aren't that bad. When it's like a whole section that I have to draw in, it can be hard to make sure you're not doing too much, putting too much pin pressure. And then sometimes on the back side of that nib it gets very loud. Same thing on this side, same thing for all the black really. Holding that back. And then this last little guy. Oh, and then the pincers, which I didn't do yet. And then adding in that little bit of highlight. Again, not much. Leaving a gap underneath that hair. And this one probably wouldn't really have much highlight at all. Alright, now the pincers. Same thing, very light. Both of these would probably be in shadow, because in both cases it's going deeper into, you know, I don't know what this is, his mouth, I guess. Alright. Where was that? Oh, not there. There. Yeah, I think it'll look better without it. But that means I do need to refine it a bit. Right, I'm going to add a few more in here. A few more in here. Just that little bit extra control. And then fix any errant lines, right? Like they're not quite as nice and neat. That happens. But I do think it looks better. Sometimes I do that. I don't do it often, where I take off a sketch layer, but with black is typically where I'm gonna do it. It's just gonna look better without it. I'm only popping it back on to see where I put the hair. I'm just gonna lightly do it. Yeah, see, that's much lighter. If I just hold back my pin pressure, ooh, not go crazy. Adding some randomness to it. More than one little spot coming up, yeah. Now these pincers. So bright. I think I'm gonna dull it out. Just a little. I'm gonna do that by finding whatever layer. Oh man, that was great. I'm gonna select all. I'm gonna nudge it with the move tool. Nudge it back down. Turn this layer off. Create a new layer, and then I'm gonna fill it with the foreground color, which I've made a lighter, or sort of a more desaturated, darker pink. And then I'm gonna do the same thing to the yellow. Come in here, get the read off the yellow, and then darken it and desaturate it a bit. going to select all, nudge the layer, up and down, turn that off, start a new layer, and then fill with the foreground color. It's definitely more muted, not quite as bright, but I still think it works. Yeah, okay. Now for the eyes. Debating what to do with the eyes because there's so much real estate, there's a lot you probably could do with it. Just changed it to white, right? Anticipating that I'm going to do the eye flare. Otherwise, you can't see a lot of detail, but you might be able to see reflection. So if there's highlight coming from above and to the right, I'm actually going to draw this in instead of just doing a circular lens flare. I'm going to have it in this shape, have it coming down, and roughly sketch out a human reflected in its eyes. And then I'm going to edit, I'm going to fill with the foreground color, move the selection, do the same thing on this one. I don't know if that works or not. I don't know that it does. I'm going to take that off. We're going to do just a reverse teardrop that we always do. See how that looks. It's going to be easier to... Maybe a combination of the two. Reverse teardrop, but with some texture. All just experimentation. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm gonna experiment real quick with like taking this with a darker, drawing in a little bit more. What I'm debating about is, right, this is nice and simple, but I think I like the extra texture here. And I don't know that that makes sense without doing something else, but maybe that's good enough. Darker desaturated hint that there's a different color here. Let's just see how this looks. If I add in just a smidge of person. I think that might be interesting. I think you kind of do get the impression that's a person there. Kind of warping into the vision. Gonna forego that. Interesting idea, but I don't know that it's really working. So I'll take the select tool then and draw the same thing on the two little ones, but smaller. And then I'm just gonna twist this guy. Don't have them quite lined up right. Alright, so that is how you draw a jumping spider. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.